Aloha mai kako. I am Dr. Adam Jansen, and I have the honor of serving as State Archivist and Administrator of the Public Archives. And I appreciate the opportunity to kind of give you a little bit of a story behind what our problem space is, and hopefully it's intriguing enough that you're going to want to help us solve this problem. Because what it really comes down to is increasing access to information. And as the newer generation, I'm sure all of you are very up on the need to access everything via the internet. Travel is extremely difficult. So the problem space that we're trying to conquer is how do we connect the people of Hawaii with their documentary history and heritage so that they can find their kupuna and understand their legacy, given the constraints of a limited ability to travel. And with this current pandemic, more so than ever before. But it's not just that. There are individuals who cannot travel. Either they have home commitments or they cannot physically leave their domicile. It's also compounded by the fact that we have massive amounts of raw data to browse through. We have literally tens of millions of pages of material. How do you find what it is you're looking for, particularly with very little understanding of how these records are actually made, how they're stored within an archival setting, and how sorry, somebody had to get in. The record making process, and also how they're stored at the archives and organized, because it's not like a library where everything is indexed to an item level and you can just browse the shelves. It's a much more complicated process. For those of you who have not yet had the pleasure of coming to the State Archives, our mission is very simple. It is to collect, arrange, and describe the public archives, which we take to mean is any record that protects your rights, your identity, your property, or your history needs to be preserved in perpetuity so that you have access to those records. Our collection started in 1843. With the oldest record dating to 1790. So we have a lot of stuff. The collection itself has grown physically to over 14,000 boxes of records and 500,000 photographs. And in addition to that, we have currently somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 to 400 terabytes of digital records. So given this massive amount of information, how does an average researcher who is not a professional historian, who's never been into an archives, how do they find that record that they're looking for? Maybe they're trying to do family genealogy. Maybe they're doing land titling, because land and water rights here are becoming an increasingly important issue. So they want to find out, well, who used to own this property? What property did my ancestors own? How do they find those things? And to give you an idea of what we're talking about, how precious and important these records and the information contained in them are, let me share with you a few examples. This happens to be a birth registry from 1861 in Wailuku. And as you can see, back in that time period, it was not a very sophisticated process. It's not like applying for a birth certificate today. The attending physician would just keep a running list on a journal. Hey, on November 1st, I was in Wailuku and this wahine was born. So trying to find this information gets to be very difficult. Here's one of our most precious examples. This is a license to marry that was issued to a John Dominus for a Lydia Paki. Hopefully those names ring a bell, because Lydia Paki would go on to be our great Queen Liliuokalani. And because she was marrying a foreigner, he had to get a special dispensation in order to marry her. And this is from 1862. It's just one example of the many, many marriage records we have. And here's yet another example of a Hawaiian who volunteered to serve in World War I. So this is his draft registration card from 1915. As I mentioned, land records, here's an example for Timateo and his property from 1852. And one last example of what passports used to look like. So here was a Brit coming into Honolulu. And so he had a very special passport that was physically signed and he had to carry with him at all times. And this is from the 1850s. So this is just the smallest example of some of the important records that we maintain at the digital archives. And if you look at this list, it is voluminous, and trying to find that one record that you're looking for can be extremely difficult, given that just this list here represents about 3 million pages of information. So how do you find that needle in the haystack? Particularly given that we are talking about physical objects that have been digitized. These are not born digital records. There's no metadata that goes with them. They are just, here is this box of records. So we need some type of advanced searching capability in order to help them narrow down this huge global scope of information down to those records that are most likely to be the ones they're looking for. And the problem is it's garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have quality metadata to go with these records, they're not going to find anything. They're not going to take the time to have to dig through every single page of record over and over and over again. The average researcher is going to lose interest and not be able to make that connection to their history, their legacy, their heritage. So the problem I have that we're asking you to help with is, how do we provide quality data? And that's going to require some type of manual intervention. Hands-on, looking at the record and giving some appropriate metadata to allow for these targeted searches. Because remember, they're all scanned images. They're TIFF1, TIFF2, TIFF3, TIFF4. It's daunting in its scope, but we have a lot of volunteers that are interested and willing to do this work if we can provide them appropriate tools to capture it. Lots and lots of people are willing to take the time every day, weekends, to pound out on their keyboard to give us some value-added service. So we need your help in making this process effective and efficient and accurate for these people. So to give you an idea of where we currently are, we scan a box of records as high fidelity uncompressed images, which means each image averages somewhere between 40 and 300 megabytes a piece. And again, when you're talking millions of images, that's a lot. So what we do is we create a single multi-page TIFF file so that it's easier to transport. It can open up without any software that you have to purchase. We load it up onto a OneDrive and say, okay, there you are. Grab a PDF file, grab the spreadsheet template that we created, and have at it. And so they'll go away for a day, a week, a month, and return something to us. It may be what we intended, may not be what we intended, but that's what we have. And then we have to try and assemble all these disparate pieces together into an even bigger spreadsheet, and then try and figure out data quality. Is that really a date? Is it a well-formed date? Is it a correct date? So it's a huge process, very, very manual. It assumes that all of the volunteers work in the same space and at the same pace. When you have volunteers that work faster than others, you can't balance the workload because they're in such big chunks. And somebody has to go through and look at all this stuff to make sure it's correct. And perhaps the most daunting part of it is the interoperability between the different software programs you're using. You're constantly flipping back and forth from Acrobat Reader and your spreadsheet, and Acrobat Reader and your spreadsheet. And I'll show you what that looks like. And so what we're left with is a bunch of unrelated separate files. So here's an example of a photograph. We've digitized about 7,000 photographs that we're indexing so that you can actually find it. And so what it requires is looking at the label, enter it into your spreadsheet. Okay, so there's the title. Now we go back. What's the description? Okay, view of Honolulu. Okay, now I'm going to enter that in. What's the negative number? Okay, there it is. It's 18,689. Okay, so now I have to enter that. And now what's the negative size? I got to flip back and look for that. And so they're constantly bouncing back and forth. And what it does is it introduces a lot of errors just because they forget between the two screens. So what we're asking for is a better tool, a crowdsourcing tool, so that we can find that needle using a magnet, something very targeted for that search, to be able to efficiently sort through all those pieces of hay and grab that needle. So what we're asking you for is a crowdsourcing tool with some pizzazz. We just don't want something that they can just go ahead and do it. We want it to be fun. We want it to be interactive. We want this tool to use some viewers so that they can do it in a single screen, so that the image is on the top with some zoom functionality, and below it is a bunch of configurable boxes where we can say, this is this type of data type, validate it. It's a proper date. It's a number between 1 and 3,000. So something very quick, simple, that can tab through, enter it all in, hit the enter button, and then move on to the next thing. And we want this all ideally in one central location, one database. So it's no longer you take this chunk of records and you take that chunk of records. If I sit down and want to do just one record, well, I just do that one record. It just gives me the next record that needs doing. If I want to sit down and spend the entire weekend doing it, it'll just serve up record after record, just, FIFO, first in, first out. The next record up is the next one indexed, regardless of who that person is. And it would also be great if we could have some type of a workflow so that those that are already indexed can get proofed in some way, whether it's somebody opens it up and looks at it, or we actually have every single record indexed twice by two separate people and compare the results. So a double blind indexing, but some type of way so that I have a high level of assurance that when we release it, it's accurate. And then we want some type of way of incentivizing the volunteers so they can reach for excellence. And this is that pizzazz part, the gamification. Let's give them something for all this amazing volunteer work that they're doing. This is free labor on our part that they do, so they should be rewarded in some way. Since we're a state agency, we can't actually pay them. We can't gift things to them. So let's give them virtual badges. Let's have a leaderboard. Let's incentivize them to want to do, well, maybe just one more record and see how that goes. So that when they reach the top of the leaderboard, they get some type of visual recognition that says, hey, congratulations, you're doing great. So you don't have to do this alone, though. So keep in mind that crowdsourcing is not a new concept. There are some very, very good examples of crowdsourcing tools that do exactly this to inspire you, to give you ideas, and to give you some good direction. This is an example from the National Archives. This is an example from the Smithsonian. They both have records far beyond the scope of what we have. So they've already kind of led the way on this. And there are examples of really fun leaderboards that you can just toss up there and just something simple, just to give them that recognition that they deserve. And then lastly, you're not doing this alone. There are some open source crowdsourcing framework tools that are out there. So we're not asking you to build something from the ground up, but we need something that is functional within the parameters of our operating environment. So we can't do this without you. We've got millions and millions of pages of information that we want to make accessible, but we need your help. So I hope that you're interested in this project and I get to see you in the breakout room. If you haven't been to the State Archives, we're on Iolani Palace grounds. Come by, come visit, come connect with your history, with your heritage. And I thank you for your time.